Whereas internalizing behavior refers to processes within the self, like anxiety or depression, externalizing behavior refers to reactions to stresses in the environment characterized primarily by actions in the external world, such as acting out, antisocial behavior, hostility, and aggression. It is very important to distinguish externalizing behavior, like hostility and aggression, from normal, healthy adolescent development, which may involve increased boundary testing and requests for autonomy. Try to view these challenging behaviors as communicating a need. Children often don't have the language to say that they are bothered or hurt, so they show it in their behavior. Ask yourself, what is the child saying or expressing through their behavior? Where might they have a skill deficit, often due to stress and trauma exposure, that might be impacting their ability to regulate their emotions and behaviors? Many times, the best way a child knows how to gather attention from adults is through disruptive behaviors. Try to prevent behavioral outbursts or disruptions with positive attention, for example, for small successes. At the same time, kids with behavioral difficulties need consistent responses from adults. So setting up a structured behavioral plan with specific goals and regular monitoring and reinforcement can help. Finally, look for the right combination of structure and support for addressing behavioral difficulties. Kids need to be held accountable for the impact of their actions, and they also need support in setting and reaching realistic goals.
Whenever you have students who engage in what we term disruptive behavior, there are a variety of approaches you can take. Kids might be overly talkative, kids might be out of their seats, kids might be off task, and there can be a number of reasons for it. So for example, you might have a kid who struggles with sustained attention. You might have someone who struggles with impulsivity. Kids might be talkative and not even realize that they're doing it. And despite your best attempts at redirection, they may continue to engage in that behavior. So if you start to notice that this is happening a lot, one of the things that you might do is figure out sort of when and where it's happening. In what contexts. Is it just during math because they're bored? Or because they don't like to do math? Is it because their best friend sits next to them and they're just two peas in a pod, and regardless of what activity they're in, they're always kind of talkative, so maybe you could separate them? It really depends on a variety of variables, and so figuring out when and where it happens will be important, and figuring out if it happens at home could be another important factor. So talking with parents a little bit in terms of kids talking a lot when they're supposed to be, or distracted a lot when they're supposed to be doing homework. And so one thing that I would suggest is if you've kind of ruled out something more endemic like ADHD, then I might work with them to modify their environment in a way that's going to make them more successful. So separate them if they're next to their best friend. Have them sit near the front of the class so you can manage them a little bit more easily and keep them on task more easily. And reward them for their on-task behavior. So if they're quiet for the entire morning, or they don't talk out of turn during the entire morning, point that out to them and praise them for it. Label that praise. Tell them what they did and what they did well. Maybe let them pick out a sticker or have an extra 5 minutes of reading time or whatever sort of their preference is. But be sure to reinforce times when they are on task or they're not talking out of turn, or when they do raise their hand, nice job raising your hand, that's so great, and so on and so forth, or whatever developmentally appropriate sort of praise you would use for it. So for students who are experiencing frequent emotional outbursts or causing physical disruptions in the classroom, the way that you intervene can vary a little bit. And one of the things that you need to identify is the potential function of the behavior. So sometimes kids will engage in outbursts or they'll become disruptive because they want attention. Maybe every time they have an outburst or they're disruptive, other kids in the class laugh or giggle or pay attention to them. maybe every time they do it, it's during a subject that they don't want to do, and they get into trouble and they're excused from the classroom, or they have to go to the principal's office or see the counselor or whomever, and they don't end up having to do whatever activity it is that they disrupted. And so if students are engaged in disruptive behavior because they want attention, then you want to work with them and make sure that you don't attend to the behavior to the extent that possible, that other students in the classroom don't attend to the behavior, and you would use more of an ignoring strategy, unless of course the behavior escalates to the point where you would need to excuse them from the classroom, at which point you would want to make sure that they don't get out of activity or whatever assignment or whatever work it is that they were engaged in. So if you were in the middle of math, they wouldn't be expected to leave the classroom and not do their math. They would be expected to go to the principal's office or go somewhere else for a finite period of time, during which they would be expected to continue working on whatever subject you were engaged in before the disruption, and then they would come back to the classroom. So really trying to figure out what it is that might be motivating that behavior and maintaining that behavior is really important. And then the second piece of that is differentially reinforcing behavior that's incompatible with the disruptive behavior. And what I mean by that is making sure to catch them being good. So times when they're not disruptive, or times when they aren't engaged in outbursts, really pointing that out in a way that makes sense for that child, and praising that behavior, rewarding that behavior, and in a sense, what that will do is minimize the probability of them engaging in future outbursts. Whenever students argue, it could be for a number of reasons, but in the end, it's important to pay attention to what's not happening during arguments. So whenever students and teachers engage in any kind of arguing, it really does postpone or delay the natural flow of the classroom, of assignments, of lectures. And so oftentimes students will argue in order to postpone or put off assignments or work. Think about that teacher that you had maybe in middle school or high school, where if you could get them off task or you could get them talking about something else, it would delay the amount of time they had to teach, which might delay the amount of homework time. So you want to be very mindful of the amount of time arguing might take up during a particular class or during a particular lecture, and make sure that the function of that behavior is not to delay the actual work. Now, students might also argue because it provides opportunities for attention. And so if arguing is giving them more attention from other students or from you, you might want to figure out other ways that they can get attention in the classroom. So, calling on them during other periods or other subjects, or having them play an active part in teaching or in providing overviews of concepts or reading aloud or whatever that might be. So giving them other opportunities to get attention, but in a more pro-social or adaptive way. And this goes back to what I've said for other questions, of course, and that is you've really got to figure out why they might be engaging in that arguing behavior. If you think that they are doing it to get attention or maybe to get a rise out of you, which kids are very good at doing, then you don't really want to attend to that behavior. So if students start to engage in any kind of arguing that really is non-productive, and you are making sure that you are engaging in or providing opportunities for them to get attention in other contexts, what I might do is just kind of cut it off and move on and really not engage in the back and forth, but instead, say something to the effect of, that's a very interesting point. In the interest of time, we are going to move on, and continue in your lecture, or calling on someone else, and so on and so forth, and not continuing to provide that attention to the argument itself, but really making sure to give them opportunities to get that attention in more adaptive ways. If a student is arguing because they've had a bad day, or they have needs that they feel aren't being met, and you get the sense that that's the case, then certainly don't call them out in front of the other students, but maybe you pull them aside before recess, or before, if it's high school, before at the end of the period, before it's time for them to leave, and you just kind of acknowledge the fact that maybe your interaction didn't go super well, and talk with them a little bit about why that might be, and let them know that you're there as a support person as well. And if there are certain things that they feel that they need, or if there's a way that you can help them sort of go above and beyond what they're getting in the traditional setting, just kind of put that out there as well. But it's still in the moment. A heated back and forth isn't the most adaptive way to respond within the context of an argument or when that behavior shows up.